What happens when one of the sharpest mouths in television walks onto a set full of women who have spent years saying exactly what they think, and none of them agree with him? What happens when the pleasantries run out, the cameras keep rolling, and two people who are supposed to be on the same side of the political aisle realize they are not even close to standing on the same ground? What you are about to hear is one of the most uncomfortable, most riveting, most honest exchanges that has ever played out on daytime television. No one backed down, no one laughed it off, and by the time it was over, the room was not the same as when it started. Before we get into it, if you are new here, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because we want to know what you think about everything you are about to hear. Now, let us get into it. The setup seems straightforward enough. Bill Maher, the host of Real Time, comedian, political commentator, longtime liberal who has spent the last several years publicly and loudly criticizing what he sees as the overreach of progressive culture, was sitting down with the co-hosts of The View. The audience was warm, the applause was generous. Behar, a co-host who has been on that panel longer than most people can remember, greeted him with the kind of familiarity that comes from two people who have orbited the same world for decades. And for a moment, it looked like it was going to be one of those comfortable, mutually agreeable conversations where everyone nods and the crowd claps and nothing particularly interesting happens. That moment did not last long. It started, as these things often do, not with a fight, but with a question. Joy leaned in and asked Maher directly about some of his most recent commentary, specifically his ongoing criticism of what he calls the woke left. She framed it diplomatically, but the edge was there. She wanted to know why he kept giving ammunition to the right, why a man who had spent his career skewering conservatives now seems to spend just as much energy going after people on his own side. Maher did not hesitate. He said he did not see it as giving ammunition to anyone. He said he saw it as telling the truth. He said that the problem with the left, a problem he cared deeply about because he was a part of it, was that it had developed an allergy to that whenever someone on the left pointed out a problem within the movement, the response was not to examine the problem, but to question the loyalty of the person pointing it out. Joy pushed back immediately. She said that was a convenient way to frame things, that what he was describing as self-reflection looked a lot like giving credibility to bad faith. Attacks from people who had no interest in progress whatsoever. She said there was a difference between honest internal criticism and handing a microphone to the opposition. Maher looked at her for a second and then said, with the kind of calm that is somehow more cutting than volume, that was exactly the problem, that the reflex to shut down any critique by labeling it as dangerous was not protecting anyone, it was just protecting the narrative. The audience shifted. You could feel it. This was not the usual back and forth. This was something with more weight to it. Joy said she was not trying to shut anything down. She said she was asking a legitimate question about responsibility, about the fact that when you have a platform the size of his, the things you say do not exist in a vacuum. They travel, they get clipped, shared, taken out of context, weaponized. And the people doing that weaponizing are not interested in nuance. They just want the soundbite. Maher said he understood that. He said he had been in this business long enough to know exactly how media worked and how things got distorted. But he said the solution to that could not be to stop saying true things. Because the moment you start editing your honesty based on who might misuse it, you are not being honest anymore. You are being strategic. And strategy, he said, was a very different thing from integrity. That word, integrity, landed in the room in a way that made it clear both of them understood what had just been said beneath it. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been listening with the particular stillness of someone deciding whether to intervene, said that she thought both of them were making fair points, and that maybe the real issue was not whether the criticism was valid, but how it was being delivered. She said tone mattered, context mattered, and she thought sometimes the way Maher delivered things made it harder for people to receive them, even when the underlying point had merit. Maher turned to her and said he appreciated that, genuinely. But he also said he wanted to push back on the idea that the delivery was the problem, because in his experience, when people said the tone was the issue, what they usually meant was that the content made them uncomfortable, and they were looking for a reason to dismiss it without engaging with it directly. The room went a little quiet after that. Joy came back in, and her voice had shifted slightly. There was less diplomacy in it now. She said she thought that was an unfair characterization, that she was capable of engaging with uncomfortable ideas. She had been doing it for decades. What she was raising was a genuine concern about impact, not a desire to avoid the conversation. Maher said, fine, then let us have the conversation. Let us actually have it. He said the thing he kept running into, not just on this show, but everywhere, was that certain conversations got treated as inherently dangerous based on who was raising them, rather than on what was actually being said. That the liberal space had developed a habit of pre-screening ideas for safety before engaging with them, and that habit was making the left worse at persuasion, worse at winning arguments, and worse at speaking to anyone outside the people who already agreed with them. Joy said she thought that was overly simplistic. that there were real reasons why certain conversations got handled with care, that the history of how marginalized communities had been spoken about, over, and past, was not some paranoid delusion. It was well documented, and sensitivity to that history was not the same as intellectual cowardice. Maher said no one was calling it cowardice. He said the distinction he was making was between sensitivity and avoidance. He said you could be completely aware of history, completely committed to equity and fairness, and still be willing to say things that some people in your coalition found uncomfortable. In fact, he said, the willingness to do that was what separated people who were actually committed to the values from people who were just committed to the identity of being on the right side. That one landed differently than the others. You could see it on Joy's face. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. The kind of expression that comes when someone says something you want to immediately refute, but the refutation is not quite there yet. She started to respond, and this is where things genuinely started to escalate, because what she said next was not just it was a challenge, a direct, pointed challenge to the foundation of everything Maher had been saying. And Maher's response to it was the moment that everyone in that room, and everyone watching at home, was not going to forget anytime soon. She looked at him and said, Bill, with all due respect, I think you have spent so long being the guy who says the thing no one else will say, that you have started to confuse being provocative with being right. And those are not the same thing. The audience reacted, not with applause, but with that sharp, collective intake of breath that a live studio audience makes when something real has just happened. Maher did not blink. He leaned forward slightly, and in a voice that was completely level, completely controlled, he said, Joy, I am going to need you to tell me which specific thing I have said that was wrong, not provocative, not poorly timed, not inconvenient, wrong, because I have been sitting here for 10 minutes listening to concerns about how I say things, and I am still waiting for someone to tell me that something I actually said was factually incorrect. The silence that followed that was the kind that fills a room completely. The silence did not last forever, but it lasted long enough to mean something. Long enough for everyone on that panel, and everyone watching, to understand that the dynamic of the conversation had just changed. Joy Behar had thrown a real punch, and Bill Maher had not dodged it. He had stepped into it, absorbed it, and thrown one back that was slower, more deliberate, and aimed with considerably more precision. And now, Joy had to answer it. She collected herself. You could see it, the slight pause, the breath, the decision being made in real time about how to proceed. And then she answered him. She said that the issue was not any single factual claim. She said the issue was the overall pattern. That when you looked at the body of his recent commentary, what you saw was a man who kept returning to the same targets, who kept finding new ways to say that progressives had gone too far, who had essentially built a second career out of positioning himself as the reasonable liberal that conservatives could point to and say, see, even the left thinks this is ridiculous. She said that pattern, regardless of whether any individual statement was technically accurate, told a story, and the story it told was one she found troubling. Maher listened to all of that, and then he said, so your argument is not that I am wrong. Your argument is that I am useful to the wrong people. Joy said that was part of it. Yes, Maher said. Okay, so tell me what the alternative is. Tell me what you think I should do, because as far as I can see, the choice you are presenting me with is either I stop saying things that make conservatives feel validated, which means I stop saying true things, or I keep saying true things and accept that some people will misuse them. And I have to tell you, Joy, that is not actually a choice. That is just pressure dressed up as a question. Sarah N., who had been largely quiet up to this point, leaned in and said she thought there was a middle ground there. She said it was possible to acknowledge real problems on the left without making those problems the centerpiece of your public identity. She said there was a difference between raising a concern once and returning to it over and over, in a way that started to feel less like critique and more like a brand. Maher looked at her and said he found that interesting. He said it raised a question he genuinely wanted them to think about. He said, if a conservative commentator said something wrong once and a liberal commentator kept pointing it out, nobody would say the liberal was making it their brand. Nobody would suggest the liberal should bring it up less. But when the direction of the criticism flipped, suddenly there was a problem with frequency. Suddenly returning to a topic was evidence of bad faith rather than genuine concern. He said he thought that asymmetry was worth examining. The panel shifted. Alyssa Farah Griffin, who politically occupied a different lane than most of the other co-hosts, said she thought Maher was making a fair point about consistency. She said she had seen that asymmetry play out in real time, plenty of times, and it was a legitimate observation. Joy turned to her briefly, then turned back to Maher. She said, I am not applying an asymmetric standard. I am saying that context matters. The political context we are living in right now is not neutral. The stakes are not abstract. And when someone with your reach keeps hammering the left, the impact of that is not neutral either, regardless of your intentions. Maher said he agreed that context mattered. He said he agreed that stakes were real, but he said he flatly rejected the idea that the correct response to high stakes was to become less honest. He said that argument, the argument that the moment was too serious for internal criticism, was an argument that had been used to silence legitimate dissent inside every political movement in history. He said the left should know that better than anyone. Joy said, "That is a dramatic comparison." Maher said, "Is it wrong?" There was a pause. Joy said, "I think it is overwrought." Maher said, "I asked if it was wrong." The audience reacted again, not loudly, but with that low, rippling energy that a crowd produces when they recognize that someone is being very deliberately pinned down. Joy said, "I think the comparison flattens a lot of important distinctions." Maher said, "Then let us hear them. I am not going anywhere. What are the distinctions?" And this is where the conversation took a turn that nobody on that panel had quite anticipated, because Joy Behar, who had been in that chair for a very long time, who had interviewed presidents and survived more viral moments than most people in television could count, began to make an argument, a real one, not a deflection, not a pivot, but an actual substantive argument about the difference between self-criticism that strengthens a movement and self-criticism that destabilizes it. And for a few minutes, the conversation became something genuinely rare on daytime television. It became a debate. She said the distinction was about timing and about audience. She said that internal criticism, the kind that actually improved a movement, happened in rooms where everyone shared the same fundamental goals, where the critique was offered in good faith to people who received it in good faith. She said that what Maher was doing was different. He was having what he framed as an internal conversation on a public stage, in front of an audience that included a huge number of people who were not interested in strengthening the left, but in dismantling it. And that changed the nature of what the criticism did. Regardless of what it was intended to do, Maher said he thought that was the most coherent version of her argument he had heard so far, and he wanted to engage with it seriously. He said the problem with it, though, was that it assumed the left had a private room to have these conversations in. He said it assumed there was some backstage space where liberals could work through their contradictions, honestly, and then present a unified front to the world. He said that space did not exist. It had never existed, and the fantasy of it was actually part of the problem, because the desire to protect the image of the movement had consistently won out over the desire to fix the movement, and the result was a left that looked good on paper and kept losing elections. The room was very still after that. Whoopi said quietly that she thought that last part deserved more conversation. Joy said, "Losing elections has a lot of causes. Bill, you do not get to put that on people who are trying to hold the coalition together." Maher said, "I am not putting it on anyone. I am saying that messaging matters. And the left's messaging has been consistently terrible for years. And no one seems to want to have a serious conversation about why. Every time someone tries, they get told they are helping the other side. And in the meantime, the results speak for themselves." Joy said, "And you think you going on television and saying the left has gone crazy is helping that messaging problem?" Maher said, "I think pretending the problem does not exist is making it worse." Joy said, "Nobody is pretending anything." Maher said, "Joy, with respect, when was the last time you sat on this panel and said, 'We got something wrong'? Not a Republican, not a conservative. We, the left, got this wrong, and here is what we should have done differently. When did that happen?" The question sat in the air. Joy opened her mouth and then closed it. Maher did not press. He did not raise his voice. He did not look around at the audience or play to the room. He just waited, the way someone waits when they already know the answer and they want the other person to find it for themselves. It was the quietest, most devastating thing that had happened in the entire conversation, and it was not even close to over. Because what Joy said next, and the way Maher responded to it, was the moment that everyone who watched that episode would still be talking about. Long after the cameras had stopped rolling, she looked at him and said, "I think we get things wrong all the time. I just do not think the solution is to announce it to people who are going to use it against us." And Maher leaned back, just slightly, and said, "That is the most honest thing you have said this whole conversation, and it is exactly the problem." That line did not need a drumroll. It landed entirely on its own weight, the way the truest things always do. Joy had said, plainly, that she believed the left got things wrong, but that announcing it to the wrong audience was dangerous. And Maher had done nothing more than hold that statement up to the light and let everyone in the room see what it actually was. Not caution, not strategy, a decision, made in advance, to manage the truth rather than tell it. Joy pushed back. She said he was twisting her words. She said there was a difference between managing the truth and being thoughtful about context. She said that functioning adults in a complicated political environment made judgment calls all the time about when and how to say difficult things. And that was not dishonesty. That was wisdom. Maher said the reason that argument never convinced him was that it had no limiting principle. Once you accepted the idea that the audience determined whether a true thing should be said, you had no floor. There was always going to be a reason the moment was not right. The stakes too high, the opposition too opportunistic, the coalition too fragile for honesty right now. He said in his experience, right now had been going on for about 30 years and he did not see it ending on its own. Whoopee, said she. Thought part of what was happening was that they were talking about different things and calling them the same thing. She said honesty from a position of security looked different from honesty from a position of vulnerability. And she thought some of the frustration on the panel came from the fact that not everyone in the coalition operated from the same level of security that Maher did. Maher acknowledged it. He said she was right that security changed the calculus. But his concern was about the leadership of the movement, not the people at the margins. The people setting the tone, running the institutions, controlling the messaging, those people had security. And those were the people who had developed the habit of prioritizing the appearance of unity over the reality of it, Joy said. And you think you are doing something different. You have one of the most secure platforms in television. If this is you speaking truth to power, I would love to know who exactly you think the power is in this scenario. Maher said, the power, in this specific conversation, is the social pressure inside the left that makes it easier to attack the person raising a concern than to deal with the concern itself. That is what I am pushing against. And that reflex showed up in this conversation within about 90 seconds of me sitting down. Joy said, what reflex? I asked you a question. Maher said, your first question was why I kept giving ammunition to the right. Not, do you think the left has real problems worth examining? The first instinct was not to evaluate the criticism but to evaluate the optics of it. And that, Joy, is exactly the reflex I am talking about. The panel went quiet. Sarah said she thought the conversation had reached something important, and she did not want it to slide past it. She asked Maher directly what he thought the practical cost of that problem had been, not philosophically, what had actually been lost. Maher said the practical cost was persuasion. The left had genuine moral seriousness and real policy ideas that could improve people's lives, and it kept losing the argument in the places that mattered most. Not because the right was smarter, but because the left had gotten very good at talking to itself and very bad at talking to anyone who was not already convinced. Joy said, and you think you are the person to fix that? Maher said, no, I think I am one person willing to say out loud what a lot of people on the left say in private. Which brings us back to the same question. If what I am saying is so irresponsible, why do so many people who share your politics tell me privately they agree with me? Joy said, because people say things in private they would not say in public. That is not evidence they are right. That is just evidence that social pressure exists. Maher said, yes, exactly. Social pressure exists inside the left, pressuring people not to say things they believe to be true, and you just described that like it was a perfectly normal state of affairs. The audience reacted, not with partisan applause but with that involuntary noise people make when something clicks. Joy said, I did not say it was reasonable. I said it was real. Maher said, the fact that you felt the need to make that distinction tells me everything. And that was the moment. Not a shout, not a single devastating punchline. It was quieter than that. It was Maher simply reflecting back the shape of Joy's own argument until she could see it clearly. She had spent the conversation arguing that honesty was complicated, that context mattered, that the moment determined what should be said. And in defending that position, she had confirmed, step by step, exactly what Maher had been saying from the beginning, that the left had built a culture where people knew things were true, felt pressure not to say them, and then rationalized that pressure as wisdom. Joy looked at him, not with defeat exactly, with something more complicated, the look of someone who had gone into a conversation expecting to win an argument and had come out of it having revealed something she had not intended to reveal. Whoopi moved things forward with the grace of someone who knew when a moment had reached its natural end. She said they had gotten somewhere real today, even if it was uncomfortable. She said she respected Ma for saying what he actually thought rather than what the room wanted to hear. Ma said he wanted to be clear that none of this came from contempt. It came from the opposite. You did not spend 30 years fighting for something you did not care about. He said the reason he kept having this conversation, even when it cost him goodwill, was that he believed the left was capable of being better than it currently was, and it would never get there as long as honest criticism kept getting treated as betrayal. Joy said, quietly, that she heard that. She did not agree with all of it, but she heard it. And for a second, beneath all of it, you could see two people who genuinely cared about the same things and were frustrated about the same world. They just disagreed about what to do about it, and that disagreement was not going to be resolved on a daytime talk show. But the conversation had been real, and real, in television, is rarer than it should be. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Bill Maher is a necessary voice of self-criticism inside the left, or has he crossed a line into doing more harm than good to the causes he claims to care about? Drop your answer in the comments below, and if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because this is exactly the kind of conversation we break down every single week.